There's too many people that are isolated in trying to do good work for God. They're all trying to figure out how to market Catholicism in a fresh way that actually engages people.
So we tried it the first year, had tremendous success.
It's exciting. I'm having fun. I'm meeting a lot of really great people.
I have been to all of these shows over the last year, and by far this is my favorite.
I want to emphasize the importance of what you're doing as lay apostles in the CMN.
The Catholic Marketing Network has a service that the marketplace needs and the church needs.
There's the distribution of a lot of Catholic religious items, but most of the people you talk to, they say, we really come for the networking.
It's a great joy to be here. In fact, it was almost 10 years ago that I came to the Catholic Marketing Network for the first time. There was a friend and I putting out sacred music, and Ignatius Press picked it up and they showcased us, and before you know it, we had sold 20,000 copies to people like you. And that sprungboard a company that now has reach in about 8 different countries.
I found really good and very interesting because I like when people come from everywhere and we can learn a lot. We come to show something, but they show us too. So that's amazing.
This is always one of my favorite events.
I always love coming here and being here because it's such a synergy to be around like-minded people with the same ideals, the same love for the church. So it's beautiful.
Welcome to the Sowing Hope podcast. This is a show all about implanting hope in our hearts. I'm Bill Snyder, joined by my friend Ann DeSantis. We're glad you're here for our uplifting conversation about faith and how it sustains our hearts through all the seasons of life. Thanks for walking with us. And good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Sowing Hope podcast. I am Bill Snyder. It's wonderful to be with you this evening, and we are continuing on to our very last discussion on the Beatitudes. Don't worry, it's not our last show, folks. It's just the last episode that we're doing on this Beatitude series because, well, we've run out of Beatitudes after today. So we have going to be talking about persecution because the Beatitude that we'll be talking about today is, "Blessed are they who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when they insult you and persecute you and utter every kind of evil against you falsely because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward will be great in heaven. Thus they persecuted the prophets who were before you." And so as I say that, I also welcome in my friend Ann DeSantis. Ann, how are you doing this evening?
Oh, I'm amazing, Bill. Great to be here with you.
Always, yes. And, I can't believe we've reached the end of this Beatitude series. And the other thing, when you're thinking about endings and happy endings, this isn't necessarily the happiest of endings. When you're thinking about a series, you always want to end on a happy note and whatnot. And today we're going to be talking about persecution. Why? Because Jesus ended the Beatitudes with persecution. And it's an interesting topic for us to talk about, especially today in the cultural climate we live in. I think it's just going to be a wonderful conversation.
It really is. Bill, I have to say, I have thoroughly enjoyed this series that we've been doing every week. And I hope our listeners are too. I think they are. And if they haven't been able to listen to some of the other ones, I just invite them to go back because this is like the last one in the series. Not to say you need to stop what you're listening to now and go back, because it doesn't matter what order you listen to them in, but this is going to be a really good one.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we think about persecution, and in particular, the Christian persecution, right? Like, what comes to mind for you when you think about being persecuted? I mean, that's not something in America I think we're been familiar with over our history of as a country, like being beheaded, like the former Christians, of Christ's time. I mean, they were really persecuted. They were martyred. Many were martyred. All the apostles were martyred except for John. And they attempted to martyr him too. It just didn't work. So, what comes to mind when you think about persecution, and how can it relate to us today?
Well, first thing that comes to mind, I guess, is sort of worldwide persecution that people suffer in so many ways. Of course, we as Catholics think of the Catholics and the Christians who are persecuted throughout the world. But I think all of us in some small or maybe large way throughout our lives can be persecuted for our faith, for living like Christ. When you walk the path with Christ, it's not an easy one, because it is one of renunciation. It is one of not your own glory or your own satisfaction, but of Christ's, what pleases him most. And when you do that, a lot of people at the heart of it don't like that, because there is an evil force that's against that, isn't there?
Yeah.
Bill?
Absolutely. We are in a battle, folks, right? We are in a battle, and Satan does not like Christians. He doesn't want souls in heaven with Christ. His number one goal is to divide that. And so that means that we will encounter difficulty, as you said, Anne. We are going to encounter difficulty. We're going to encounter, persecution, because Satan is trying to keep our souls out of heaven. Christ wants to welcome us into heaven. So there's going to be struggle. There's going to be persecution. There's going to be difficulty when it comes to understanding and growing in our faith. It just is how it's going to be. But I think it's about how we approach persecution. It's how do we approach when we are persecuted. And there's a story that comes to mind for me, because I had the privilege of living with conventual Franciscans at a place called Marytown, which is the national shrine of St. Maximilian Kolbe. And for those of you who don't know the story of St. Maximilian Kolbe in depth, there are plenty of resources, and I encourage you to Google them, find them, and read them. But I had the privilege of living at the National Shrine of St. Maximilian Kolbe, and Maximilian Kolbe, who is a Catholic saint, was born in Poland, and he was a Polish Catholic priest, and he lived in the time of the Holocaust. He lived in the time of World War II, and he was arrested for spreading the Catholic faith. He had a magazine called the Militia of the Immaculata, and the organization continues on today. But this Militia of the Immaculata had a newsletter. It went out to people all over the world. It goes out to people all over the world, I should say. But he was spreading the Catholic faith. The Nazis did not like this. We think a lot about Jewish people being arrested. We think a lot about that. Of course, Jews were exterminated in large numbers. But Maximilian Kolbe found himself in a concentration camp. Probably the most iconic, or I should say most, I don't think iconic is the right word, but the most recognizable anyway, name of the concentration camps, Auschwitz. And he found himself in Auschwitz. And in Auschwitz, there was an escape one day. So, Maximilian Kolbe, being a Catholic priest, I think approached life a little differently in this persecuted environment. I mean, it was horrific conditions that we can't even imagine. here in our minds. But Max, when he was in this concentration camp, as I said, there was an escape one day, and so to discourage any further escapes, what they did was they lined up all the prisoners. They lined every single one of them up, and they said, "We're going to be selecting 10 men to die in the starvation chamber. That's what we're going to do. We're going to send you to the starvation chamber. 10 of you randomly are going to be selected, and you're going to go to the starvation chamber and die there." And one of the men, Francis Gnichek, what's his name? He was a Jewish man. He had a wife and children and whatnot. He was one of the men that was selected by the SS officers to die in the starvation chamber, and immediately he dropped to his knees and he cried out. He just cried out in this loud voice, please don't take me. Please don't take me. My wife and my children, please. And at that point, St. Maximilian Kolbe raised his hand and he said, "May I speak? Can I come forward?" And most of the time, if you raised your hand and spoke, out of turn, you were just shot on the spot. Like the little German Luger came out and you were just dead. But by the grace of God, that didn't happen. And Maximilian Kolbe was ushered forward to speak to one of the head officers, and the head officer asked him his name, and he didn't say his name. He said, "I am a Catholic priest. I am a Catholic priest," is what he said. "And I want to take that man's spot. I'll die for him. You send him back. I'll die for him." And that's exactly what happened. Maximilian Kolbe was led to the starvation chamber. And now what happens after that, of course, isn't recorded. It doesn't have good records anywhere because they were sent to the starvation chamber. But many accounts of it from hearsay say that Maximilian Kolbe, when he was led off to the starvation chamber, was leading the people in prayers and songs daily. He was praying for them. He was administering just prayers and praying for these people and helping them die in the grace of God. And at one point, there's a legend at one point that this one of the SS officers came in and said to him, "I am so upset with you. Why won't you just die? I want you to die." And trying to inflict more pain through starvation. But the crazy thing is that Maximilian Kolbe would not die. They wouldn't die. He wouldn't die. He just kept singing and praising God. And, it was like, 10 days or whatever without food. And here he is still going. And the incredible thing is that they had to poison him to death with carbolic acid on the night before the Assumption. So August 14th, 1941 was when Maximilian Kolbe was executed inside the starvation chamber because he wouldn't die. And he just kept praising God and singing these praises. And so we think about persecution. And yes, was Maximilian Kolbe persecuted? Yes, he was persecuted for his Catholic faith, for spreading his Catholic faith. And he was and he was doing this not just during, again, like I was talking about earlier, during the Roman times in the Colosseum, right? That time. No, this was cars were on the road, folks. This was, 60, 70, 80 years ago. That's what we're talking about. This is that time that he was living and thriving. So, he can be an incredible example for how to have faith through persecution. He was absolutely persecuted, but he absolutely trusted and placed his hope in God. And the incredible thing is that Francis Gnichek, the man whom he saved, lived and survived the concentration camp and made it to I think he lived to about age 93, if I'm correct. He lived to 93, and then he actually made it to Maximilian Kolbe's canonization as a saint. Think about that. The man that, and he was a lifelong Jew. He never converted to Christianity or anything like that. But to be able to make the canonization of the person who saved you, what a wild thing.
I love that story, Bill, and I've read it and heard it before, and you can hear it over and over again because the love that was inside of him was the fire of the Holy Spirit. It was basically he was living Christ, wasn't he? I mean, that's what it came down to. He personified Jesus Christ, especially toward that end when he was with all those people who were dying. And his only wish was that they could live a happy death and that they could go to heaven and that they could be forgiven of any sins that they had. And he wanted to bring God to them because, you and I and the people listening, we can't imagine what they went through at the end of their lives and that sacrifice. And the sacrifice that he made was incredible. And he was living that last beatitude, that 8th one, wasn't he, Bill?
Absolutely. And, I think that the words of, the promises of Christ are really important to remember. In the Beatitudes, so like, blessed are the persecuted, right? That's sad. But here's the reward, right? Right? And it says, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. What is the result of being faithful through persecution like Maximilian Kolbe? I mean, he's an example of a canonized saint, right? Now there are many uncanonized saints. There's many saints that are in heaven that are not canonized, right? But the persecution that he endured, he was assured of heaven, and the church says he is in heaven. He's been declared by the church as in heaven with God. Like, and that, so if we are faithful, I really think that it's faithful through persecution. That's the other thing too, right? Like Jesus is saying, when they insult you and persecute you and utter every kind of evil against you falsely because of me, right? Like that means that there's an aspect of faithfulness that has to remain there. Like, it's not just running away, right? It's not just running away. Oh yeah, or saying, I'm not Catholic. I'm going to deny Jesus. Like, Peter did this too, right? St. Peter did this too. But the reality is that, if we can remain faithful through the persecution and not deny Christ, the reward, is heaven.
Yes, Bill, I agree with you. And it's the truth. And when we think about our own lives, there's times in our own lives where this happens to us. Not that we will become exactly like Maximilian Kolbe and we will be martyred. A lot of us won't. Most of us probably won't be. But there are times in our lives when we have crucial decisions that we make when it comes to sticking up for what we really and truly believe in. And when there are people in our lives and people who aren't in our lives too, who will persecute us for that. And it's persecuting you for doing the right thing. And I know that we could probably talk about that on a personal level too, but that would be a long podcast, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But I think to some of our listeners out there who are with us on this podcast, they can understand. And I just found something from Catholic culture online that says that the poor in spirit, those who mourn, those who are meek, those who thirst for holiness, those who are merciful, those who are pure in heart, and those who are peacemakers might experience persecution for Christ's sake. But in the end, this persecution is a cause of joy of great recompense in heaven. The path of the Beatitudes is one of paschal journey that leads from life according to the world to one that is of God. From an existence guided by the flesh, that is by selfishness, to one guided by the Spirit. I thought that was good because it kind of encompasses like everything we've been talking about over these weeks.
Yes.
With the other Beatitudes, and how this one is like the one that sums it all up, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of a capstone to everything because, yeah, you're right. If you are doing these other things, if you're living the other Beatitudes, you're surely going to be persecuted for it. The world today, I think we can talk a lot about like white martyrdom, where that is, not the red martyrdom of Saint Maximilian Kolbe or the countless other martyrs of our faith. Like we can talk about white martyrdom too, where we live in a culture of white martyrdom sometimes in America here. I mean, we are witnessing what they call cancel culture, right? I mean that there's that term out there, cancel culture, where people of virtue just are being deplatformed or being completely left, out to dry. Where you're still alive, but your livelihood has been stripped away from you. Your, because of your faithfulness to Christ. Like, that's a real thing, and that's really happening to us right now in 2021. Like, that's not some pretend, thing. These are affecting people's lives. They're affecting people's livelihoods, and we can go through it. It's also affecting people's legacies. Most recently, a wonderful children's author, the most prolific children's author, Dr. Seuss, came under fire from this cancel culture. And, certain books of his are being just deleted, trying to be erased from culture. Now, does anybody have that right to do such a thing? Like, this is persecution. And they're not calling it persecution. They're calling it cancel culture. They're saying you're in the wrong. But I think as we continue to go and move through our future here in America, we have to really stand up. We have to really band together, and we really have to say, no, we do not deserve this. And through the persecution, remain faithful. But as we talked about in other previous episodes too, being a light to those people who are then marginalized because of the persecution. So if you are seeing this happen in your society, in your family, in your community, where this is happening actively, it's not just Dr. Seuss, folks. It's people all over the place. If you are being persecuted because of your religious views, if that is happening to you, or happening to somebody you need to reach out and provide that support, and the encouragement to them. That's part of being the Christian, part of being the Catholic, is to reach out and say, you know what, I stand with you. You're not alone. And yeah, this is going to be tough. It's not going to be easy, and no one likes being persecuted like this. But let's remember the end goal, and the end goal is that you and I, whenever this heart stops beating, are going to be in heaven with Christ.
Perfectly said, Bill. And I agree with you about the cancel culture. I think that it's something that we as a whole entire culture might not have been prepared to receive. If we talked about this 2-3 years ago, I know that I wouldn't have known what that word meant, but now I do. And it's a means also for us to reflect on our personal lives, because within our own families, within our own neighborhoods, within our own communities, and sad to say, even our own churches, there are people who are being persecuted for the sake of righteousness. Good people who are being marginalized by the powerful. And that's what it comes down to. That's what it comes down to. It comes down to sometimes when people who are more powerful and more, well, I hate to say, but more worldly too than others, that have only a goal of getting ahead and of stepping on other people, whether that be in your own family life, community, wherever it is. And then someone is being an outcast, someone is marginalized, someone is poor, needy, and in need of support. And when we can be the people to stand up for those people, right? We can be, and they're not always the ones that we think. You think of someone who's homeless or someone who is extremely poor, and yes, of course, we're including that. That is what it is. But it's also someone who has, as you said, has been a victim of the cancel culture. It could be someone that people gossip about. It could be that one family member that nobody talks to because there was a misunderstanding with one more powerful person in that family who had more influence on other people than that other person who's maybe a little more quiet or a little more virtuous that doesn't want to gossip about others. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Or someone in your church community. Sad to say, not always in every church community or in every religious community are people living a virtuous life. There are people who look at the church as a way to get ahead, as a way to become popular and powerful. So I don't know about you, Bill, but I try to stay clear of that.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I try to stay clear of that in my own life because I've seen it, and it is not of God. Religion is not a checkbox. Religion is not something we check a box and say, well, I went to this Catholic grade school, this Catholic high school. I go to breakfast after daily mass on Saturdays with all my friends. I'm a member of this council and that committee and this. It's not about that. It's about how do you treat people who come to you who need a friend? How do you treat people who want just basically want to be heard? Or when you get a random phone call of someone who's really desperate and needs someone to talk to.
Yeah.
How do you react when a group of people discuss someone that where that what they're saying is not true? And even if it is true, it's nobody's business for them to be discussing, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And
because it can fall into gossip pretty quickly.
Right. And as Christians, you bring up a great point. As Christians, we have to stick together, not divide. Like that's part of it. The church culture has to examine itself. We are the body of Christ. Like, we are the body of Christ. And when you really sit down and meditate on that, when you really think about it, I mean, it's easy during the season of Lent, when you think about going back to your Lenten journey just a few months ago, when you think about that, like, it's easier to meditate on the wounded body of Christ during Lent. So as you think about that, like, think about how you are wounding the body. Think about where your sins are on the person of Christ. And, there was no part of his body that wasn't wounded. None. Every inch of his body had a gash on it somewhere. And, it can be through slander, through whatever, but think about, wounding that area of Christ, and think if it's really what you want to do. like, is that really what you want to do? As you mentioned, not everybody in a church setting is a saint. People use the church to get ahead, to do things, in their professional lives. That practice has to be abandoned. As you mentioned, to be a parish council member, to do this or to do that. Like, this is not a status symbol. And if that's the way you're approaching your faith, you're approaching it the wrong way, and you're probably persecuting others in that role. It's very easy, and I have examples that I don't need to share publicly on air, but I've spent many years in parish ministry. I've seen the inner workings of a parish. I've been both guilty of doing that and on the receiving end of being hurt by people who really don't want authentic faith in a parish. They just want to check a box, as Ann said. Oh, I'm on this committee. I've served on the altar committee, or I've served on parish council now for this many years, so I can stick it on my professional resume and get a better job. Like, I've been on that. I've seen that. And what I would suggest is that if you are in a spot like that, to really think about the service aspect of it, right? Like the washing of others' feet. Instead of trying to figure out, how you're going to benefit from this. Think about Jesus at the Last Supper and what he did, and that was wash other people's feet. Right? He washed the apostles' feet. And that's what we're called to do, is we're called to wash the feet of the apostles, of the other people out there serving, of our friends. We're not called to persecute them. So I really think about that, Ann, and I take that to heart. And I know that the times that I've done it, I'm guilty of it. I've been a parish staff member, and I've put myself as, I got the key, I can do whatever I want kind of mentality. I've been there. I've done that. I know I've wounded people, and I know that I've had to approach those people and say, I'm really sorry for acting like that. That's not appropriate. That's not good. But just really, really think about that. Because the church needs to be a place free of persecution. The church needs to be a place that is the welcoming, open arms, where and safe haven for people who are being persecuted by the world. Let's not persecute them in the church too.
Oh, so I said well said before, but I will say it again. That was well said and true. And for those of us who are Catholic involved in ministry, or just go to people, churchgoers, no matter what your religion, whether you're Catholic or Protestant or another denomination, it happens, right? I mean, because we as humans are inclined to sin, and one of those sins is pride, right? And so that whole idea of, hey, I'm somebody, I'm religious, I am a Eucharistic minister, or I do this or that for my pastor, or I'm friends with the bishop, I'm good friends with some of the bishops. I mean, people use that too. I thought I could read something else that I found on Catholic culture. And this has to do with the whole idea of part of this whole concept of persecution is when people and groups look at others as a nuisance. And it says that if the world lives on the basis of money, whoever demonstrates that life can be fulfilled through giving and renouncing becomes a nuisance to the system of greed. This word nuisance is the key, because Christian witness alone, which does so much good for many people because they follow it, is a nuisance to those who have a worldly mentality. They experience it as a reproach. When sanctity and life lived as children of God come to the foray, in that beauty which is uncomfortable because it begs that a position be taken, either one allows oneself to be open to the question and to the good, or one rejects the light and hardens one's heart, even to the point of opposition and hounding. And that's from another source. It says within the Catholic Culture article that I'm reading, it says, it is curious. It calls our attention to see how in the persecution of martyrs, hostility grows to the point of hounding. It is enough to see the persecutions of the last century, of the European dictatorship, how one arrives at this hounding of Christians against Christian witness and against the heroism of Christians. So I think when we think about that, Bill, think about that word nuisance. I want to think that's something we can really unpack. For each and every one of us, we have felt like we were a nuisance to someone, or someone came to us and they were a nuisance to us, right? And really being a Christian, I think, is when we can put the needs of other people as just as important as ours. And especially when we're people who are ministers of faith in some way. Like I look at us, even on this podcast, Bill, we might not be at a pulpit or, at the front of a church preaching, but we are talking to people about faith. So in some way we are ministering.
Of course.
So if we would ever become people, which pray to God we won't, right? But who are not open to individual people who come to us to this ministry and just have questions or whatever. We as Catholics and as Christians, I think, aren't to look at others as nuisance. And sometimes I think even in our Catholic world, whether it be Catholic nonprofits or churches, diocese, archdiocese, when people come to a church or when they call someplace, parish secretaries or other people are not to treat them like they are a nuisance to their day, right? And I think that's an important aspect of this whole idea of blessed are those who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, right? Parish offices, diocese, archdiocese, and pastors. I want to say this too, right? Because we have a lot of priests, pastors, and religious that are listening too. People are the gift that God has given you. If someone is asking you a question, right? Okay, there are boundaries, right? We all know that there's boundaries, right? We have to eat, sleep, and breathe too. But what I'm trying to say is that now, Bill, we repeat this over and over again on this podcast, that being well catechized has to include how we treat human beings. It isn't just about a checkbox. It isn't just about only theology of the body, although I love it. And I know you do too, Bill.
Yeah.
But it's also how we treat people. You can't treat people badly and say, I'm well catechized. And that's a line right from my new book called Love and Care for the Marginalized, which is going to be coming out in 2021. But that's one of the lines in my book. You can't treat people badly and proclaim that you are well catechized. I don't know if you had anything to say on that one, Bill.
Oh, yeah. Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. And you know what? You cannot claim to be well catechized and then be, like that. I totally agree. The other thing I think is that word nuisance. I mean, I know, that word nuisance is such an important word, I think, and one that's inspired by the Holy Spirit for sure, because, man, don't we treat so many people like that, Ann? Don't we? I mean, I know, I know that, I grate on people's nerves. I know I do, and if I really want to do it, I know how to push the buttons of those I love, like my wife. I know exactly how to push. You know what I mean? And they and they can do the same to me. Like they know what buttons to push and how to irritate somebody. Like, and you're not going to agree with everybody that walks in your doors. But especially as a parish or as a minister, and here we are. And as you mentioned, Anne, we're doing ministry. We might not physically see the faces of people, but we know we're doing ministry because of just the sheer metrics of the internet and the number of people that are listening to this. We know we're out there doing ministry, and we're providing hope in the midst of darkness. That's what our show's all about. But the reality is that when somebody emails us or when somebody pushes our button and says, hey, you know what, can I get some help? And we are like, no, you're a nuisance, get out of here. Then we're actually doing the persecution. So we have to be careful as ministers to say, you know what, no, God has placed this person in my life for a reason. I remember I was at my very first parish as a youth minister, and there was a gentleman who was pretty needy. He was very needy, and honestly, some of the administration at the parish did not like this man. They knew his history. They knew that he was a guy that came from a rather bad past. He had more than 5 skeletons in his closet. He had some pretty bad experiences, and he had treated people pretty poorly. But this man had had entered the parish and kind of turned his life around, and he had become a caretaker for an elderly woman. That was his job. He was hired as a caretaker for an elderly woman who happened to be Catholic and went to Mass. And you would never guess it, but this man converted through taking this woman to Mass and to confession. He would wheel her in the wheelchair in and out of the confessional. And guess what? He finally stepped in the confessional one day. And a lot of the people at the parish who knew this man's history, maybe he was involved, they had alluded that he was involved in organized crime and a bunch of other things. And he ended up talking to me one time, and then it ended up being more than one. And I would, I would get sucked in my day talking. Sometimes this man would be in my office, or I'd be chatting with him in the parking lot for, 2 hours. I'd be outside my car. I remember one time standing outside my car for like 2 hours talking to this man about life, about faith, about where he had been, about and all of these different things. And he was being shunned by some members in the on the parish administration because they knew where he had been. And I just couldn't do it. And finally, one day, somebody confronted me about it. And they said, "Why are you spending all this time? I see you standing in the parking lot with this guy after work, and he's just talking your ear off for 2 hours. Why are you doing that? He's been involved in X, Y, and Z, and this and that, and this and that." And I turned to that person. I just said to him, I really don't care about this man's past. I said, I know, and I think he knows that he's done some things that aren't really great in life, but he's going to confession. He's going to Mass. His life is turning around. And Christ is calling him. And you know what? Here's what you're doing. You're judging. You're not only judging him, you're now judging me, because I'm spending my free time talking to this man about faith. And I just have I have a problem with that. I have a big problem. And it shocked this person and kind of jolted them, and they never talked to me about it again. They never addressed me or that issue again. Because, but it's so easy to do. It's so easy to do. Oh, I know that person. I know exactly who they are. They're the guy that's involved in organized crime in Chicago. I don't want to be anywhere. But what happens when that guy has a St. Paul moment and he comes back to the church and he falls off his horse? Who's gonna be there for him then in his journey? Are you going to offer the forgiveness, or are you going to continue to persecute? And folks, I've been on both ends of it. I've seen both ends of it. I've done the persecuting. I'm far from sainthood. I can think of 1,000 instances where I've been on the other side of it, but we got to reflect. We got to take time to be able to say, you know what, and slow ourselves down and say, and give ourselves that reality check and be like, no, I'm not gonna. I'm gonna believe that God does and can and will change hearts.
Amen. And I'm thinking of some ideas along those lines, because when we look back on our lives, and some of us who are over the age of 18, and you look at times like high school, where there were times that there was the popular group of kids, and then there were always those ones that, and maybe, I know I've experienced it myself, where you felt left out, or when you were the only one by yourself and not picked for, when they pick teams in gym class and things like that. As simple as that sounds, but that's a good example, I think, for us to reflect on, is that if you've seen that happen in your life before, either you know what it feels like, or you've seen it being done to other people, and it's not good. And it happens in family life too. I hate to say it, Bill. I know you understand that. It does happen in the families and extended families and with parents and with siblings. I think especially when they get older, beyond living in the same house, you get a lot of that sort of like family gossip. I think parents are called to bring peace to families and not to try to pit siblings against each other. Parents are not called to talk about one child to one and then the other to the other. And then, I don't know about you, Bill, you're expecting a baby. And by this time, a little Elvin has been born because we're pre-recording this one. But for me, if my kids were not peaceful together, and if they didn't have a good relationship all the way around with one another, I wouldn't want that to be. I would want them to be peaceful. And so I think that that's what's part of being that peacemaker too, not forcing it, right? Not forcing it, but we also don't want to be a reason to make it happen, to the marginalization happen, if you would agree on that. And I would want to say one more thing if I could.
Oh, yeah.
Just backing up and talking about church life. Talking about church life is the whole idea that pastors, bishops, priests, religious, and even nuns, will say sisters and nuns, there's a lot of focus on sexual, the sexual crimes that have been committed in the church. And it's a terrible thing when you think of that. But I want to bring up another point that isn't talked about very often. And that is when priests and religious and pastors and bishops, whoever, use unkind words and persecute people with their words because of their power. That is a wrong thing. And that is completely against, God. So I don't know if you had anything to say about that, Bill, but I do believe that needs to be said because it is not just about the sexual crimes. It's also about the way we treat human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I think treating human beings and being kind in that movie Cinderella, right, the most recent remake, there was that beautiful moment where one of the characters told Cinderella, the mother, before she passed away, had told Cinderella, always be kind. Always be kind. That, and that stuck in her mind, be kind. And I think that is one of those things that we really need to re-examine. Now, there's a big difference between skirting the truth because of kindness, not representing the full truth of the faith because we think we're being kind. That's actually not being kind, right? When we acquiesce on our beliefs, when we say, "Oh no, I'm going to renounce this because it's being kind to somebody to let them persist in and manifest grave sin in their lives," that's not kindness.
Yes.
But talking about the gentleness and the reverence, and how we relate the truth, it can be done in a kind way. I see so many things on Facebook, that where people just write like, wild, outlandish, things on on Facebook, like he's an agent of Satan. Well, what has that accomplished? What has that actually accomplished? Did that accomplish anything? Or did it just turn a bunch of people off to you? The kindness, I think, is really important. And so when people come into a parish setting, when they see, the sins and failings of the church, of the church officials, it's not just the sexual sins. You're right, but the reality is that every person, regardless of whether they're a priest, a bishop, a religious sister, a deacon, they also are sinners, just like you are, And we have to remember that. Do we hold clergy to a higher standard? Yes. Should we? Absolutely. But I believe, and I truly mean, that we have to recognize that they too are fighting a battle. They too are struggling and fighting their own battle in their lives.
Amen.
Right?
Oh, absolutely. Glad you said that. I mean, I brought that up also because I think it needed to be said, but this applies to everybody. I mean, this kindness rule, like you said, it's not just to say, hey, do whatever you want. Go ahead and sin and go do something terrible. It's not about that. It's about the way that people who come to us that are quote unquote these nuisance people, right? They really just want maybe some advice or maybe need our help in some way or a listening ear, is that we just have to be careful, because that's really the demonstration, as it said in that article, of the nuisance people that we tend to put those labels on, that we're better than them, right? We're not better than them. Yeah. And we shouldn't act like we are. And we shouldn't feel like they're a nuisance. We could be a nuisance to somebody else too. So when somebody, whether it be a homeless person, whoever comes up to you, don't act like, none of us should act like we're better than anybody else, because we're not. Right. Doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter who has a better job. It doesn't matter who has a bigger house. It doesn't matter who has a nicer hairstyle. And it doesn't matter who has a better Catholic ministry. I'm going to just say that too. Yeah. Right? Because there's a lot of even of comparison stuff, even within Catholic nonprofits and ministries, that people say they want to become this or that, or that everybody knows who we are. Is that really what it's about? No. That you just want to say you're the best and the most recognized, nonprofit or something like that? Right. Isn't more about like who you're helping? Yeah. And doing God's will? Exactly. And the other thing, I'll just say this for people out there who are listening. Know your limitations. Know your limitations. Know your own weaknesses. Because in those situations, when, if you're finding somebody as a nuisance, if you're finding them as a nuisance, know the limitation. Recognize, okay, God, I perceive this person to be a nuisance in my life. They keep coming in here asking me for help. I don't know how to help them. Well, a really good suggestion is to get the qualified people around them. Because when you find and give people actual help, actual meaningful help, God wants to solve their problems. There's a reason why they're coming into the office or they're coming into your ministry asking for this. I need this. I need a deeper prayer life. I need I need some money for gas. I need whatever they're coming to ask you for. When you solve the need, then you build up their faith, right? Isn't there that line in the Bible? I forget which book it's in, but there's a line that says, if somebody comes to you asking for a glass of water and you say, I'm going to pray for you and send them on your way, you've done no good for them, and I'm paraphrasing that, but that's the reality. We also have to have work, and works without faith is, faith without works is dead. We have to be able to do the works. We have to be able to have the works. And if somebody's coming to you with a genuine need in their life, help them solve the need. You are not maybe called to personally solve that need. But do they need to speak with a therapist? Do they need to get some financial counseling? Do they need to get something else? I remember a guy came into the office on the day that it snowed the most in Wisconsin. It was like snowing beyond snow, and all of the roads were closed. Our priest said, "Go home," and I lived a block and a half from the church. And there was Eucharistic adoration going on during the day. And he was like, just go home. I'm like, Father, I can stay here. It's no problem. I can work in the basement. I can walk home later. And that's what I did. And so I stayed and I worked the day, and everybody else went home.
except for the people who were close by and praying in Eucharistic adoration. Well, this guy came in riding a bicycle to the parish. And I was sitting in my office, and he needed help. He was doing a ride. He was doing a ride from to raise awareness for like cancer or something for a child. He was riding a bicycle across the United States, in raising funds and awareness and all this stuff. And he wasn't even Catholic. He was Episcopalian. And his name was Ben. He comes down. He's wandering around the office, and he goes, "Listen, I can't ride another step. I'm supposed to be at a youth hostel, staying at a youth hostel in Madison, which is, 60, 70 miles from where we are. There's no way this guy's riding a bicycle in this." And he goes, and he's like, "Well, is there anything I can do? Can I stay here?" I'm like, "No, you certainly can't stay here in the parish, man." And I said, "You know what? Let me see if I can get somebody and call somebody." And this guy needed help, And so nobody would pick up their phones. Nobody would answer. It's like, okay, I don't have all this money to go buy a hotel for him or anything like that. I'm not going to do that, to stay overnight or anything. But I ended up calling a homeless shelter, not getting any response from the homeless shelter. I just drove over there. I put his bike in the back of my car, and I took him over to this homeless shelter. I said, "This guy needs one night. Can you put him up?" And they took him, right? They took him, and they let him stay the night. But that's what I mean. Solve the need. Solve the need.
Amen.
I wasn't
that
called.
was a great story.
But I wasn't called to put him up, or in my place overnight. I wasn't called to buy a hotel for him. I was called to solve the need. And if we don't give people actual help, did I ever see Ben again in my life? No. But in that moment, I was called to help him. And he got his bike, and I'm sure he got to Madison the next day when they're out, roads were plowed. But I mean, this is what we're called to do as Christians and as Catholics, and this fights the persecution. Believe it or not, it actually fights persecution. Because if I wouldn't have given him that help, how would have he felt? Well, the Catholics, all they do is write them off. All they do is write people off. That fights the mentality of persecuting somebody, right? No, this guy helped me out, and they must not be all that bad,
That's a beautiful story, Bill. Thank you. I mean, and it makes so much sense. This has been a great podcast because it's something that we can all reflect on. So I just want to invite you who are listening to keep thinking about this one. I mean, read through the whole Beatitudes. We're finished with this series, but I'm sure that Bill and I will be doing another series soon. Thank you so much for being a part of it. And as I said, we have a whole total of 8 programs on the Beatitudes. So go to Patchwork Heart Ministry YouTube channel and subscribe if you haven't already, and go to the playlist for the Beatitudes. Bill, thank you so much for all of your wisdom during this podcast.
And likewise, Ann, it's always a pleasure doing this with you. And so, folks, we thank you so much for tuning in. As always, check out our websites for more information about us. But if you're new to the podcast, keep listening. And thank you, as always, keep beating to your Catholic heart and sowing hope into broken hearts.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Sowing Hope on Patchwork Heart Radio. For more information about this podcast and our ministries, visit our websites, patchworkheart.org and andesantis.com. You can also follow and interact with us on Twitter at PWH Ministry or Andy Santis 2. Over 2,000 years ago, 2 disillusioned disciples walked along a dusty road to Emmaus. They had just witnessed Jesus, their friend and leader, whom they hoped to be the Messiah, suffer a gruesome death by crucifixion. Doubt, fear, and uncertainty clouded their conversation as they journeyed home, questioning the future. Until something miraculous happened. The risen Jesus appeared and answered their questions. Today, many young Catholics step onto college campuses with numerous questions about their faith, yearning to know if the seed of faith given to them as a child is both true and practical. Using the miracle on the road to Emmaus as a model, young adult ministers conversed weekly for 3 months with college students about the most pressing questions they had about the Catholic faith. As they journeyed together virtually, something amazing happened. Doubts disappeared, fears faded, and Jesus revealed that He is still alive. Hearts Burning Within Us, the latest book from Patchwork Heart Ministry, scheduled to be released in the summer of 2021, is a result of that grace-infused conversation. To pre-order your copy and help spread the word about the book, visit patchworkheart.org.